see that. It covers all sorts of mysteries in the Sooner State, from ghosts, UFOs, and probably like you are here, Bigfoot. But to give you a little insight into what got me started in being interested in the paranormal in the first place, all goes back to when I was a kid. I was living in Oklahoma City. Actually, this is a satellite view from Google Maps of where I was living. This house right here, which is next to this big church. And my father was a minister at the time, and often my brother, myself, and some of the other kids that had to stay behind after church and endure that long wait while the adults just talk and talk and talk, as adults will do. So what we would do is just run around all through the yards and play around here and come back behind. And one day, when we were playing along here, we ran back into the alley, which you can see running along the top part. We came to this spot here where we were stopped by something that has literally haunted me ever since. We saw through a section where there's the back of this building here that you can't walk through. There's no doors back there. And across the way is a fence with a thick vine of berries growing in it. Across that area, a woman, she walked. And that in and of itself is extraordinary because there's no way a person could cross through there. She was very unusual. She looked very anachronistic, like she came out of a different time period. Something out of like you might see in a Little House on the Prairie. She had a very old-fashioned dress. Her bun was, she had her hair back in a tight bun. And she had this very hard, stern expression on her face. As she crossed the alley, she's completely colorless. There's no color to her at all. She kind of moved in this sort of electric glow about her. And she was pretty solid up top, but as you look down at her, she started to get lighter, more transparent going down. Well, halfway across the alley as she's walking, she stops, she pauses, and she looks at us. And then she turns back and continues on and passes right through where that thick fence was that was just filled with a berry bush. There was no way a person could walk through that. And that was pretty much the most frightening experience I think I'd had to that point, and it stuck with me ever since. And I think that was what got me interested in paranormal, was just having that personal experience. So I went on from there. I called her the Gray Lady. That kind of gives you a sense of what she looked like. She's a pretty creepy looking woman. So you know why it stuck with me. But I went on from there, and I read all I could find about hauntings in Oklahoma and found some great stuff. Some of you may be familiar with these. And then I went on, I read all about UFOs in Oklahoma, and that just floored me. I was like, wow, UFOs? And including this famous one that was taken by a boy in the mid-60s in Tulsa. And I read about ghost towns and treasure tales, oftentimes with ghosts of their own. And that was pretty amazing. I was finding all these great stories from Oklahoma. And of course, things like witchcraft and voodoo. I wouldn't have expected that. And your favorite, Bigfoot. And I thought to myself, these are some great stories that are just right here in the state, and they're not really getting exposure. I'll give you an example. I thought, well, why not write a book? So I started collecting these stories, and I did a lot of research, and research is like a treasure hunt. What I ended up doing was going through libraries and collections and just anything I could find that might have a strange story, websites even, to find everything I can on Oklahoma. And I ended up getting some pretty obscure stories that had never seen, I think, the light of day in maybe like 100 years, as he said earlier. So one of the qualifying criteria I had for these stories was they had to be documented. You know, everybody's heard of, oh, my friend told me that his cousin went down. You know, everybody's got those. But I wanted some that were really believable because people went on record. They said, you know, my name is and they were willing to put themselves out there so that their story could be known. And so I went through those and found just some great stuff, long forgotten, never before published stories that, I'll give you an example. Love this thing. I'll just read this to you. It's up there. Follow along if you want. This is a written oral account to give you an example of some of the rare finds and how I found them. Was in the Oklahoma City Metropolitan Library System's Oklahoma Folklore Collection. Now this isn't just like a book that sits on a shelf. This was a story that was collected by the Works Project Authority back, in the 30s. And it just sat in the vertical file in the library. It's never been in a book before. So in this collection, they recount a frightening encounter several men had with a Bigfoot-like creature, or was it some kind of spirit? And you'll find out why. I asked that. While camping by a church cemetery somewhere in Oklahoma Territory around 1881. Although not recorded until 1936, these frightening events were still very clear in the minds of Theo Hamilton and Robert Milligan. As the men tell it, a group on a work-related trip decided to camp near a church and its cemetery. After parking their wagon and setting up camp, the group played cards outside for a while. As time passed, the winds began to pick up, forcing them into the church to finish their game. Sometime later, a commotion erupted from the camp outside. The group could hear the banging of their skillets inside the wagon and the general destruction of their camp. However, when the men raced outside, they were surprised to find that everything was exactly how they had left it. The camp was intact, the wagon unmolested, and the horses perfectly calm. Puzzled, the men simply scratched their heads and started for the church again. But then they were stopped in their tracks when they spotted a large apparition resembling somewhat a prehistoric monster with large staring eyes. Frightened, one man threw a large rock in the creature's direction, but the beast seemed to vanish. In no time, the group broke camp, hitched the horses, and raced into the night, far from this haunted cemetery and its frightening apparition. One wonders, did these men encounter some unearthly specter, a demon perhaps, or could the passage of time have embellished an already startling tale into one so phenomenally supernatural? In reading this, one could easily see a run-of-the-mill Bigfoot story. And is that what happened? Perhaps in the years that followed, this story took on a life of its own, as each retelling added another fantastic element, or maybe these men saw exactly what they claimed to have seen. Sadly, the WPA investigator who recorded this tale from Hamilton and Milligan failed to glean such salient facts as the exact location, the name of the church, etc. We do know that Hamilton came from the Blackwell area and Milligan from Beaver. Unfortunately, since they were traveling at the time, this does us little good in locating our mysterious church. This is an example of some of the strange, obscure stories I was able to find and collect in the book. And you probably have your own stories, lots of them, especially people in this area, because I know there's been a lot of activity over the past decade. It's been a real hot spot. If you go by my table out there, I've got these sheets where you can write down your own story if you want. I'm currently working on a sequel to my book, and all the stories I can get are great. So it's going to have more ghosts and strange creatures, UFOs, treasure tales, all that sort of stuff. Also some unusual characters. I remember one story that's going to be in there. This woman was arrested for dressing like a man. That was her crime. She dressed like a man. She wore pants. How dare she? And that's the blog I've got. You can go to that site. You can find out more about the book and all that. That's the book there. But what I wanted to do now was to first actually tell you kind of why Bigfoot interests me. Just wanted to run through about my book real quick, and then I'll talk about more specifically about Bigfoot. I think my fascination with Bigfoot stems from when I was a kid. My grandfather, who lived over in the southeast corner of Missouri, not far from Oklahoma, and he loved to tell tall tales. I mean, he sees two eager, wide-eyed boys, and he's ready to tell some big yarn and sucker us in. One of the ones he would tell us about was the ape men, as he termed them, of those eastern woods. Gotta love them. But we would just sit there and just drink it in. One story he told us was he was on a fishing trip to Arkansas, and he was on a creek down there, and he had heard several times during the night this unearthly, piercing howl. It's like a screech or a howl combined. It was weird. He couldn't quite articulate how it sounded, but he knew it didn't sound like anything like some sort of cougar or bobcat or any sort of animal he'd heard before. And he really took notice, and he grabbed his gun, and he was ready for some action here. He didn't know what was going on. When across the creek from where he was camped, the bushes started rustling, just pretty violently. Now, he never saw anything, but he'd heard enough tales from the area that he had a clear idea in his mind of what it was. And later, some years later, when my brother and I were spending the summer with my grandparents, we were sitting down to dinner, and they lived out in the country, pretty much area like this. And they had a small little farm. In the corner of the farm was a hog pen where he raised hogs. And while we were eating dinner, a commotion erupted from the hog pen. They were squealing and they were frightened. So Grandpa gets his gun. He's thinking there's coyotes out there, something messing with the hogs. So he and my brother race outside. Sadly, I missed this. I guess food was more important to me. But my brother and him, they race outside. They've got a flashlight. They're shining the flashlight around, trying to find whatever it is that's making the hogs go crazy. And they come across something that, I mean, my brother's been freaked out about since. It was on two legs. It was hairy. It turned to them, and in the gleam of the flashlight, it had these two eyes that kind of shined, as my brother described it, kind of yellow, very amber. It saw them, it turned to them, and then it ran away. It was there was a back fence along the back of the property. It leapt over that fence. It had to be about 4 or 5 feet tall in just a single bound. It just jumped right over it. And I think hearing that story and the other stories my grandfather would tell us about these ape men, as he calls them, really, really cemented my fascination with Bigfoot. And then to hear from time to time again about these animals that are said to roam especially this area of Oklahoma, I knew I had to include those in the book. Let me just grab one or two to share with you so you can kind of see some of the ones that I've found in this story, in this book. An unnamed woman told the researcher John Green, who some of you may be familiar with. He's pretty famous in the annals of Bigfoot. She related to him the story that happened to her as a child in 1956. Her family and neighbors had several encounters with the hairy ape-like man in the mountainous area 13 miles outside of Wilburton. The creature had been seen walking along a pond near her home, as well as hanging over a neighbor's fence. The girl's sister even claimed to have almost touched it as she reached into a bush while picking some berries. And then I found in another out-of-the-way place, 1971 issue of Fate magazine recounted the tale of several Oakwood residents who had seen a creature resembling a gorilla between November 1968 and January 1969. The same month, 100 miles south in Indianola, several people claimed to have come face to face with a large creature that looked like a monkey, as they called it. Highway Patrol Trooper Brent Tucker had been out near Cogar in Caddo County one fall night not too long ago when he encountered what may have been a Bigfoot. Hearing a noise from behind, Tucker turned around and witnessed a head and shoulders which stood, as he said, about 5 feet taller than the corner post. Suddenly the figure was gone, leaving Tucker stunned. He couldn't conclude that it was a Sasquatch, but he was certain it was neither a cow nor a horse. The creature was very human-like. This is one of my favorites. It's here in the Kiamichi Mountains area. In November 2003, on the north end of Black Fork Trail in the Kiamichi Mountains, logger Eric Hardaway discovered a line of rather large five-toed tracks in the soil of a freshly carved-out logging road. The prints appeared in the soft soil after a heavy rain, and Hardaway was quick to document them on video. Each track measured over 17 inches long and 6 inches wide, which is basically the same length-width ratio as an adult human male, only much larger. In addition to the large foot size, the individual or creature that made these impressions had a 7-foot stride with a 3-foot stance. Hardaway, who had first spotted the tracks while hunting with a pal, soon showed his father the strange prints. Not long after that, more loggers and onlookers came to examine the site. In a scene reminiscent of the now famous Jerry Crew encounter, these famous tracks were found in the fresh soil of the Humboldt County, California logging road during the fall of 1958 and gave rise to the oft-used name Bigfoot. But there's lots of stories from the mountainous areas with the trees and the woods. You look around here and you think, yeah, there's got to be something in those trees lurking around. But there's another story that's from the western part of the state, which you wouldn't think of because it's a lot of prairie and not a lot of tree cover there. In western Oklahoma, just before the onset of winter 1982, a 15-year-old boy named Billy Perry spent a day tracking coyotes south of Vici in Dewey County. As he followed the coyote tracks along Trail Creek, he heard a growling that made him stop. 20 yards away, standing on 2 legs, was some kind of animal. Frightened, he ran for his car and quickly left the area. Perry later recounted that the creature stood 4 or 5 feet tall, was fairly wide, covered with reddish-brown hair, and had a foul, sewer-like smell. This encounter was Billy's first, but it would not be his last. He and his family had several more run-ins with the creature for over a month that winter. Perry's 2-year-old sister, Melissa, was frightened by a bear, as she called it, at the window. The boy and his father grabbed their rifles and ran outside. Checking all around the house, there was no animals, but a foul odor still clung to the air, and strands of hair lay nearby. These samples sent to Hayden Hughes, Director of Sasquatch Investigations of Mid-America, proved inconclusive. Exactly what methods Hughes employed to determine the nature of these strands is uncertain. However, he did state his opinion that when such a creature was caught, we will discover that it is an intelligent creature and that it had been pushed back into the wilderness and forced to migrate. A few days after Melissa's encounter, the father heard a coyote barking as it moved toward a strange creature. The coyote and the creature fought briefly, but the coyote didn't last long. The next day, he discovered coyote hair littering the ground where the fight took place. The creature also had a skirmish with the Perry's dog 2 nights in a row. The creature's fetid odor could even pierce the stench of the Perry's hog pen. Billy said he often heard something crunching around in the brush near there. Soon after, men began hunting through the area in search of the creature, but their efforts were ultimately fruitless. Other sightings were being reported in Dewey and nearby Roger Mills County, and state game ranger Lawrence Damron reported that the creature was sighted only 2 or 3 miles from his home, southwest of Cheyenne. So it seems like the Bigfoot phenomenon is not just in one corner of the state, it gets around. But there's more stories in Oklahoma. I know in Lawton area, back in the 60s or 70s, and I've got this in here, there was a story that made it in the newspapers about, they called it a werewolf. But if you read the accounts, you start to get the sense that they're not talking just about that. And they're describing something on two legs, bipedal, it's walking upright, covered in hair. Even one story says it was wearing blue jeans, which I just find strange. But sometimes that's how these stories slip into newspapers and magazine reports. So if it's a subject that interests you, and when you're reading, you're researching about these, don't discount the occasional werewolf or something like that, because it may just be mislabeled by people. And in that case, it seemed to be time and time again they were describing something that was really more ape-like, that was spotted by a lot of people there in the Lawton area, and even made it in the newspapers. It was pretty well famous at the time. I just feel like I'm rambling. Does anybody have any questions or any thoughts? Sir, in the back.
I remember hearing somewhere that there was actually a sighting in the Lawton series, just slightly before that, where a woman actually claimed to have seen a Bigfoot stealing some clothing off her line.
Yeah, that was included there too. As a part of that rash of sightings, there was something. It was in some of the accounts. It was called, werewolf or a what's it, and that it had taken clothes from the line, and you have to wonder how that fits into everything. I mean, was there some sort of crazy homeless person that was running around naked, stealing clothes, and then she calls it a Bigfoot, or was it actually a Bigfoot stealing clothes? For what purpose? I can't imagine. But then later, when you hear about other sightings in the Lawton area about this, as they called it at the time, a werewolf, wearing blue jeans, you have to wonder, if there was such a creature, what's to prevent it from slipping on some pants, maybe mimicking what humans do.
Well, the reason I was bringing this up, Bigfoot Facebook, there's a sighting from Northern California that's essentially the same. A little girl encounters a 8-foot tall hairy creature that's wearing clothes that are way too small for her. It's to the point of ripping the clothing. The only thing that she describes it, it sounds like pretty much classic Bigfoot, but the author states that he obviously thinks that he found some clothes and tried to be human. And I think this might be a parallel.
Yeah, and it could be one of those anomalies that prove to be very interesting, especially if it shows up in multiple times over different areas. It's easy, if it happens once, to discount that you saw a Bigfoot wearing clothes, but then when you start to hear various reports from here and there, that it starts to have some validity. Because, known animals that we know about do some strange stuff. I have 2 dogs, and that's where they're insane half the time. So, I could believe it. Sir?
Where was your grandfather's farm?
It was in Milford, Missouri, kind of just outside of Joplin. Sir?
In your research, what was the most common type of, shall we say, unusual occurrence?
In regards to the Bigfoot alone, or any
Bigfoot versus UFOs versus what were the most common?
that I found the most stories on?
Yes.
I think it would have to be probably a tie between the ghost stories and the Bigfoot stories. Yeah. In fact, the trifecta for the book would be ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoots. They were all kind of up there. The Bigfoot, surprisingly, especially as I said in the past, probably since 2000, maybe just a little bit before, it was just a sudden explosion in sightings, especially here in the southeastern part of the state, just almost overnight. And if you look back statistically over the data for as long as there's decent records in Oklahoma, you will see a periodic spike. And then about 2000, maybe about 1997, that spike kind of gets messed up a little, and there's this sudden explosion that keeps seeing more and more spikes over a short period. So again,
One more follow-up.
Yeah.
When there is a group of sightings, how long, what type of period of time can that be established? From, do they last over 30 days, 60 days, or do they tend to continue for a great deal of time?
Generally, when I saw anybody break up accounts into, like a rash or a flap of sightings, there usually was an interval of about anywhere from 3 to 6 months. Sometimes if it seemed like it was a larger trend over a larger period of time, that interval between sightings would be broken up over a year, like 2 years go by and then more. But with the Bigfoot up until probably the mid-90s or so, I would say that the interval was maybe measured in years. It shortened down to months after that. So. Sir?
Sightings in the center part of the state?
The center part, there are a few, not as many as certainly this part, but there's been sightings on El Reno is very famous for one. They called it the El Reno Chicken Man. I love that name. It's kind of a misnomer, but it has to do with the fact that it broke into a chicken coop and ate some chickens. But one of the things about that made it interesting was that, if I recall, the creature left behind a kind of a handprint on the door that was certainly not something that was human-like. I mean, it was 5-fingered, it was very ape-like maybe, but not human-like. Man.
I haven't spent time in West Missouri as a child. Did your grandfather ever talk to you about the ghost light?
The ghost light, the spook lights?
The ghost light.
Yeah, I've got those stories in my book as
Because
well.
my grandmother told me that she saw that when she was a child.
Yeah, the spook lights up in they kind of call it the Spooksville Triangle up there between Miami.
The Hornet ghost light.
Yes, that's the Hornet.
Yeah.
Kind of between Miami, Joplin, and Seneca, yes. Man. Any recent sightings? Well, I last published my book a few years back, and I've just recently started catching up on sightings. I know there have been periodically on a regular basis in this area. It slowed down some since the early 2000s when it just picked up, but there's certainly some great resources you'll probably find a lot of these booths are local groups, and they keep track of those sightings all the time. In fact, they're a great resource for me finding the stories to include in the book. But I know in just the past 6 months or so, there's been 1 or 2 other sightings. Hunters went out hunting and found something. Back, I think maybe this past year, there was a family that had some ATVs out, and the kids were riding them out a little later as the sun was setting, and I think it was near Anadarko area, and one of the boys encountered what he would describe as a Bigfoot, and it's hard to tell when children are involved. I myself, when I talk about the events in my book that I had personal experience with as a child, I throw in the caveat that, I know I was a child, I could misconstrue things, So it's tough when you hear the reports from children and they're agitated, excited, and their imagination's going crazy. But there's lots of recent stories. Is somebody else? Fresh out. Ma'am, I'm sorry.
When you were researching for the spook light information, did you hear about the one, it's out of Dakota in a little community, used to be called Wilson Grove? My parents told me about a light down there that they used to do down there. And they said any time of the night you could see that, and it was in a place where there's cars or
What did she say?
Wilson Grove was a place that this is your grandparents?
my parents.
Her parents had told her about there were reports of spook lights in the Wilson Grove area, and that it was a fairly regular phenomenon.
All the time.
Yeah, all the time. I don't remember that Wilson Grove, but that's I'll definitely jot that down mental note to include it in my next book. But yeah, I got a lot from the spook lights in the northeastern part of the state. A lot of great stories from legends that the Quapaw Indians had, to legends that early settlers had, to even explanations that scientists have tried to put forward. Man,
Yes. Do you know anything at all about the spook lights or the hauntings of Fort Washita?
Fort Washita, yeah, I've got stories about Fort Washita. Let me see if I can find some of these spook light and haunting stories for you. I was all prepared for 1 week. Let's see.
They're
Mark
not
these
down,
pages.
they won't be down in the fort area, they'll be back over this old cemetery toward the back of it.
Yeah, well, I don't think I have spook lights about it, but I know there are haunted stories about Fort Washita. As I said, the spook light stories I had were mostly centered on the northeastern part, but there was also more in the Panhandle area around Beaver and places like that. They have spook light stories as well that go back pretty far back to the mid 1800s. So people have been seeing those definitely a very long time, and there's been explanations from, swamp gas to reflected light, but a lot of these stories come before really electricity, so it's hard to know that those headlights could be the explanation or anything like that. So. Sir, all the way back there.
Yeah, there's been a very rich tradition of Oklahoma Native American stories, legends, folklore concerning the Oklahoma Bigfoot. What has been your experience and your research, and how far back does that go? What tribes seem to be more prevalent in those stories?
There are, with the Native American stories, they're among the oldest, logically. The two that I really found the most from were the Seminole and the Choctaw. And let's see what I can't speak either language, so I don't even want to try to pretend to pronounce these words. But I believe the Choctaw called them something that translates loosely to big black man or big tall black man, and they described it as being this dark, hairy covered, and they said it smelled like swamp. And theirs goes back pretty far back. In fact, I've got a little section on that. I'll just read you what it was that I have included in the book about those early accounts. The anthropologist James Howard recorded one in his book, Seminoles, Medicine, Magic, and Religion. In this volume, he relays a legend of a Sasquatch-like creature known as, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Stikakaki. It's Ssticappcaki. They call it Tall Man. This creature resembled a man, yet much taller, 10 feet or more, covered in gray hair. In addition, it was known to have a piercing odor like that of stagnant water. The Choctaws knew the creature as Chito, or Big Black Man. And then I've got some stories from those local Choctaw natives. One was Billy Ludlow in 1951. He and some of his friends had an encounter. And then another Choctaw woman, Charlene Cusher, was told by her grandparents that a boy had gone missing in their area, and that the boy was lost in the woods for, I guess, a number of days, and that when he was found, he said that he was taken care of by this thing. That's what he described it as, a thing. So a lot of old legends from probably one of the oldest ones, and it's a little debated as to its authenticity, but 1849 there was a diary of a man named Bertrand Tonka, and he was a resident of present-day what's known as Eagletown now. In this diary, Tonka tells of a trapper named One-Eye Bascombe who related a story to the locals of a strange critter, his words. In the nearby swamps, Bascombe described the creature as having a stooped posture, long arms, and gray-black hair, as well as an unusual step. So a lot of the Native American stories go back pretty far. Sir,
Anything from Caddo's on Bigfoot?
any what now?
Any stories from Caddo? This was Caddo land at one time, prior to the Presbyterian.
I did not find many on the Caddo. Like I said, there are a lot of stories out there, but finding the ones that were recorded, that was my goal there. And in the next edition of this book, the sequel, I'm loosening that restriction to allow more just stories that people told, as opposed to ones that were well documented. So, and I think somebody had a question earlier over here. Yes.
I just had a question. After all these many years, 150 years of sightings, why hasn't Sasquatch been captured, caught, killed?
That's a good question, and one that a lot of these people are exploring and debating. And
Are they like super intelligent?
there's different theories. On one end of the spectrum are the rigorous scientific minds who will say that they live such opposite lives that, perhaps they're much more nocturnal, they're in very remote areas, and they will point out to, how remote some areas are and how few people ever go there, and the statistical odds of finding one. And then there's the other end of the spectrum when you have people that will say that creatures like this aren't entirely of the natural realm. They are supernatural, so that their explanation for these things are that they, could phase out of existence and disappear into another dimension. There are others who believe that they are related to UFO activity. They will point out statistically certain areas of the country where there's a hotspot of UFO activity and Bigfoot activity at the same time. So, but it's not hard data, so it's hard to tell if that's accurate or not. So I don't think anybody's come down with a definitive, like this is the answer, nobody's griping about it. It's something that's hotly debated. If it's been reported this long, why hasn't it been found? And I think in the more remote areas, there's a certain logic to that. You can kind of understand why something can go unnoticed, because there are parts of the country that are still very remote. Hardly anybody goes out there, maybe some sort of forestry worker, and that's about it. Every once in a blue moon. But you have to only look at examples such as the mountain gorilla from Africa in the 19th century. For a large part of the 19th century, the 18th century, it was believed to be a myth. It was a myth that the natives in the jungle told of the mountain gorilla. And then it was later proved that such a thing actually existed. So sometimes I think it just takes a while, and I think that these people with their improved techniques, which have definitely improved over the last few decades, that maybe they'll find something. And I can sing a song if you want to hear it. I heard over there the karaoke they were doing earlier. God bless the people. That's the strangest thing about Sam State. So, yes. Did you do it? Did you do the karaoke? Oh, yes. So, does anybody have any more questions about it? I don't know how long my program is going to run or so, but I can just ramble. Man, you got another question?
No, I don't have a question about the Sasquatch, but
Okay.
in reference to your seeing the lady.
Yes.
I had a very similar experience. Would you like to hear about that?
Yes.
In the early 80s, in fact, it's around 1980, I was doing foster care for some Kiowa children.
Actually, come over here and give you a little microphone to talk to. We're going to do this open style.
Around 1980, I lived in Guthrie, Oklahoma, and I was the program director of a foster children's home and family service agency. And I had with me a couple of children, Iowa children, young teenagers. And behind my house was a nursing home and an alley ran between. And across the back of my house, which was an old antebellum house, built in the 1800s by first cousins to the DuPonts. I won't give you that one. But it had a lot of history. I had come from the nursing home where I had adopted a grandma and grandma over there. And I was entering the back porch. That's just kind of a ratty old back porch with a little slamming screen door. And I walked in on the back porch, and in front of me was a squatty, built very much like I am now, a little Indian woman. Of course, then I was built like this. And she had a dress that looked like a flower sack material and big black wearing type glasses. And I just wondered if she was someone from the nursing home. And I looked at her, and I knew the reason she was there was like, you better make sure my kids are okay. Do not do anything that would harm my children. Take care of my children. And then she just dissipated. I could see straight into my kitchen. And so the next day, I went to Oklahoma City to work, went to the files, started looking through the files, and so I thought, I think I'll research the children I had. And in the back of the file was a picture of their mother who had passed when they were very young, Bill and Naomi Hillman, and that had been their mother.
Just like the lady.
She was the lady.
Yeah.
She was the lady.
I think most of us probably, if we really think about it, we can find either a personal experience that we've had with something that's paranormal, mysterious, unexplainable, or certainly somebody we know. And those are a lot of the stories I tried to collect, especially for Oklahoma in the book, was stuff for Oklahoma, because I didn't really think, as I looked around, that there were stories about Oklahomans and things they had seen and witnessed. Halfway through writing it, though, I discovered that a man named David Ferris had written a couple of books called Mysterious Oklahoma and More Mysterious Oklahoma. So I was like, dang, this story had been done. What am I doing? So I decided, okay, I'm going to go ahead with my project, and I'm just going to include more, better, and just go over the top and do as much as I could possibly find. And I found so many stories that I thought there's nothing left in Oklahoma. But as you can see, there's always a story that people have. I remember not too many years ago. This is a ghost thing, but it's a personal experience of mine. And again, I don't know how to categorize it, but I was staying with a friend, and he had gotten this gift from another friend. It's kind of a twisted little gift. It was a skull, a real human skull that they had found in Hawaii in some wooded area. And it was real. It was all brown, like it had been buried under the ground. It looked like it had some trauma to the back of it, like maybe somebody got slugged in the head and that's how they died. But ever since he'd gotten this gift, he said all these strange things happened, like the walls would undulate, like somebody was pressing against the walls and they'd just bulge out. And that he would wake to find somebody sitting on his chest. And it was really spooky stuff like that, and I laughed it off. But one night when I was crashing on his couch, I woke and there was something crouched at the foot of the couch that I thought was, I don't know what it was, but I kicked at it. I was freaked out. Ended up turning on the lights and there was nothing there. So I don't know if it's imagination or if there's something to it. So I think I've tapped out all the questions. But nobody? No? Okay. I'll just keep talking. I think I got an hour to kill here. I don't know if I planned this too well. 15 minutes. Oh, okay. I know they're trying to make up for lost time, but ma'am.
You said something was setting at the foot of the bed by something you need a shadow.
It was just an amorphous, dark shape. It didn't have any like features to it. I couldn't tell it was a person. So yeah, it was basically like a big blobby shadow. And I just got the freakiest feeling from it. It's just, it scared me to wits. But I turn on the light and there's nothing there. But thereafter, you still feel that fear that kind of hangs in the air, and it frightens you. So I think actually I will wrap it up and help them catch up on their their schedule, so no problem. Thank you all for coming. Hope I didn't bore you to death.